We're now today moving more specifically to the impact of new technologies. We've got 2 sessions. Both of those sessions are very important today. I know one of them has attracted more attention than the other, but both of our sessions today are very important. I'm delighted that we've got the witnesses that we have here. The first session is about the opportunities and challenges around AI for performers, writers and visual artists, including intellectual property, the use of image and audio likenesses, and the automation of work. And then when we get to the second session, that will be looking at a particular project, Ada the robot, as a case study for some of the issues which I hope we'll be able to explore first with our witnesses. So please, may I ask you to introduce yourselves and tell us the name of the organisation that you represent. And I'll start with Dr. Guadamus.
Yes, I'm Dr. Andrés Guadamus. I'm a reader in the intellectual property law at the University of Sussex. I'm also the chief editor of the Journal of World Intellectual Property, and I've been studying this for about 10 years.
Thank you.
I'm Paul Fleming. I'm the General Secretary of Equity, the trade union for performers, directors, designers, dancers, choreographers, children's entertainers, burlesque artists, comedians, and so on and so on and so on.
Very good. Mr. Conway.
Hello, I'm Dan Conway. I'm Chief Executive Officer at the Publishers Association. We're the trade body for publishing in the UK across consumer publishing, education and academic journals.
Okay, thank you. I should have said at the start that we are currently transmitting live on the internet. A recording will be taken, both a written transcript and video, and both of which will be published on our website in due course. First question, Lord Bishop.
Thank you. Well, can I have my own thanks to you for being with us this afternoon? And I have to say that I'm really delighted to be able to question real live human beings and not be confronted with a robot to begin with. We hear an awful lot about the potential of AI, and I was really delighted to read that a Nesta report suggests that the UK is currently one of the world's leading research centres in AI, has a strong position in AI research in domains potentially relevant for the creative industry, such as our working on image, text and sound data. There's also, of course, a lot of hype around AI. And the first question is a rather general one, in which I'd be grateful if each of you could say something about what you see as the possibilities, the potential, and indeed the pitfalls for AI in changing the way creative and cultural content is produced in the next 5 to 10 years. So shall I start at this end, Mr. Conway?
Thank you, and it's a real delight to be here, so thank you for having me. At the Publishers Association, we've been thinking about the opportunities of AI for a few years now, and about 2 years ago we produced a report called People Plus Machines, which looked at the opportunities for AI across the publishing value chain, so all the way through from content generation and acquisition through to product development and then sales and marketing. And the reason that we did that is because of a general perception of the debate in this area, which is that often we feel it's seen that there's AI innovation going on over here, and then we've got the creative industries over here, and that they actually stand in opposition to one another. And the same would go for AI and IP, that one stymies the other. And the reason that we wanted to produce the report was to show that in a sector like publishing, there already is a huge amount of AI innovation ongoing, and actually our overarching view is that AI in the creative industries enhances human creativity and doesn't replace it. So we've seen a huge amount of AI activation across publishing, as I say, throughout the whole value chain. And usually that's about actually saving the human creator from the jobs they don't really want to do. So take an academic researcher, for example, who's trying to make sense of the world's academic content on a particular issue. It's incredibly helpful for that academic researcher to be able to use a piece of AI to go out and collect all the information to allow that sort of content creativity generation to take place. And then further down the supply chain in publishing, we have publishers using AI to tackle plagiarism, copyright infringement. In education, there are some really interesting things going on with adaptive education technologies. So learners can engage with education platforms, and that platform can teach that specific learner in real time, dependent on where they are in their learning cycle. And then, much like other sectors, we use AI in our sales and marketing divisions as well. So it's probably not as headline catching as the witness that will follow us, but things like stock management and demand forecasting and just real life business things. So our overarching position is that AI already is employed all the way through the publishing sector and is overarchingly a force for good, in the sense that it helps creative businesses become more efficient and reinforces the human creator rather than replacing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fleming?
So I suppose, it's perhaps first important to caveat any talk about AI in a sort of historical perspective. The first ever Equity General Secretary to give evidence to a Parliamentary Select Committee was in 1931. And in 1931, item 5 in our annual report was talking about the threats and opportunities of recording theatre productions and the rise of Hollywood. So, I mean, there is a little bit of history repeating itself with some of the hyperbole around AI. And I suppose that we would see it dividing very straightforwardly as a trade union into two areas. So there are the areas of a growing area of work for members, computer games, the ability for your voice to be used, the synthesization of your body, your movements and so on. And actually, indeed, some of the labour-saving things from jobs which our members don't particularly enjoy doing. You probably don't realise, but an awful lot of commercial radio jingles that you hear now are entirely synthesised and created from a melody of different voices. That's work that's not particularly creatively fulfilling for members. It's not work they particularly relish doing. It is nevertheless work that they do, and actually that has taken some of the brunt out of that. So there is an awful lot of extra work that is created through AI in both a broad and quite a narrow sense. The real risks of AI from our members' point of view are on the labour market. And I try and make it really, really clear that our members are no more effective than somebody who encounters AI because they work on the checkouts at a supermarket. Now, somebody who works on checkouts at a supermarket has not seen their hours decrease, their pay increase, stay stable, or indeed increase because the profits that are potentially garnered are larger. Actually, what they've seen is their hours decrease, their relative pay decrease, and their work become more precarious because of the introduction of AI into their working lives. So if you take the instance of radio jingles, well, radio jingles actually tended to pay broadly quite well. It's quite repetitive work, so you have to pay quite a lot to incentivise an artist to do it. It's those relatively higher levels of wages that facilitate our members working in poorer paid areas of the performing arts, most notably theatre and live performance. If you think about people who were walk-on or supporting artists who have now essentially been largely erased from big budget films, who are now replicated for battle scenes or crowd scenes and completely and utterly cooked up in the background. Are our members' pay, is it increasing from other engagers? And is the pay and ongoing usage payments for that work, is it fair, proportionate, or in a way that's going to sustain a creative workforce? No, it is not. That's doubled up with the problem that where we've dealt with AI in very established areas of work, 95% of British TV and film is made on a union collective agreement. We've managed Star Wars or all that sort of stuff quite well within that framework. But if you think about new and emerging areas, we have one agreement for video games. Those sorts of areas of new work are more difficult to unionise. And then finally, it is that, we'll talk more about it later, I suspect, but the overall intellectual property framework, the rights our members have, the moral rights that they can depend on, that framework in this country is weak. It's not helpful for our collective bargaining position, and it's not helpful in terms of protecting our members from unreasonable exploitation. So there are opportunities of new work, but there are serious risks within the impact of those opportunities and our ability to respond to them.
Thank you, that's really helpful.
Yes, I would like first to address perhaps the question of the hype. There is definitely quite a lot of hype on artificial intelligence. Some of it is justified, some of it is unjustified. And I would say that just looking at the area as I've been doing for many years, something that has struck me is there has been a very clear advance particularly in the last couple of years on the technology itself. Things that were not possible 7 years ago. When I look at the things that I was using even 7 years ago, the capacity of the artificial intelligence is at a different level, entirely a different level. Some things, even in the last 6 months that we're seeing, things are changing. And particularly in the creative industries, things like art, I don't know if anyone here has played with some of the tools, DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, Midjourney. It's like magic. You type a few words and you create something that it appears to be like magic. So there is some justification on the hype. Having said that, there are also, I think, possibilities and challenges that this revolution is bringing. It's a revolution, and I cannot state this enough. It's a revolution akin to the personal computer and the mobile phone, the smartphone. I think it's something, once you start seeing it, when you start using it, is amazing. However, there are challenges, and challenges that have been mentioned already. I think that there is quite a potential to have artists and creators be affected by this. There are people that are very angry, very vocal, that their livelihoods are going to be affected by the technology. And that, I think that's something that we have to explore as well.
Thank you. Can I just to come back? You both, Natalie, outlined potential and pitfalls, but Mr. Conway, you were pretty much exclusively positive. Do you see negative sides in your area or not?
Well, I think there's some real difficulties about the way that the IP framework is working, but I know we're going to come on to that. In terms of sort of labour market substitution, in consumer book traditional publishing, it's just not something that we're seeing. But I can see that in other areas of the creative industries, perhaps that is a concern. I think my view on that would be that, particularly in fiction publishing, the creative process is, and the audience's, the reader's reception of that creative process is quite complicated. So, I heard, as I'm sure all of the members of the committee did, I heard Ada on the Today programme this morning, the conversation was around, is creativity just a process? And I think, our view, the publishing view is no, it isn't, and the reason for that is that it's also about how that process is received. Part of the beauty of the creative industries is the kind of emotional connection between a human author in my sector and a human reader. And I've seen that Ada, who's incredibly impressive, and I'm looking forward to staying and listening to her, is able to produce Oscar Wilde's poetry through being fed Oscar Wilde's poetry. And that's incredibly impressive, but it's not Oscar Wilde's poetry. And I don't think that if Oscar Wilde's The Happy Prince was written by a machine, it would be the tearjerker that it is. So, while I concede that there may be some labour market amendments in relation to AI, probably in my sector in relation to potentially more specialist works with a smaller readership, perhaps away from fiction, we're just not seeing the sort of same level that, with respect, Paul may be fearing in his sector.
Thank you.
Just a supplementary from Baroness Bull.
It's a really short question on tearjerkers, because I think you're saying The Happy Prince couldn't have been a tearjerker if it wasn't done by human hand, but I think we were hearing that some jingles and jingle-like music and perhaps some schmaltzy themes are being written by AI and may well be tearjerkers if they learn about the the little catch moment when can you think of a tearjerker? I'm looking at you. Can you think of a tearjerker piece of music that's been written by a machine? Does this argument go across all art forms, or is there something specific about the written word?
I mean, I've never been brought to tears by a windscreen replacement advert, so I'm not sure that prices perhaps, but the adverts no. I think there is a danger. So if we talk about, there's the idea that AI would, for instance, read a novel in the place of one of the audio readers of our members and produce the same emotional reaction in an audience. At the minute certainly seems untrue, but I think we're perhaps naive to think that it would not become untrue, because ultimately what is AI? AI is reliant on our own intelligence, and anything we can do a machine can do, as long as it advances far enough. So I think it's certainly true. It's not an immediate challenge to reproduce that very, very intense artistic process, but does the effect of a battle scene, or indeed the effect of a video game that you've controlled, which are all real human movements, but actually are responding in very different ways, can they produce similarly heightened emotion, I think they probably can.
Ms. Featherston?
Well, it was just to say that, I mean, could, theoretically, a robot generate a book based on whatever you infed to it? And could that not ultimately replace publishers having to pay authors?
The answer is yes. It's already happening. It's possible. It's not going to be a tearjerker. It's not going to be the height of literature, but it's already possible. It's the technology is already capable of producing passable works. Let's say it's producing art that looks very nice. I've made a few myself that people have liked. It's possible to produce music. Again, it's not going to be the most amazing.
That's all cheaper than human beings.
Exactly.
Then what's going to happen?
Yeah, it's going. That's potentially the competition aspect. It's going to produce lots and lots of works that are low quality, not the most amazing. Yes.
Well, that's the point, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
If I could.
Just before we move on to the next question, I just wondered if I could ask Mr. Fleming, in the context of performance, as it were. I mean, I understand the concerns that you've expressed, and we'll come back later on to impact on the labour market. I just wondered if there was anything positive that you wanted to say about AI in things like choreography, or the kind of the anything that makes the sort of production, as it were, of a show or whatever, sort of different or improve it in some way that wasn't there before. I'm just trying to see if there's another angle in terms of the positive side of this that we haven't heard.
I mean, I'm a trade union bureaucrat, so not particularly well qualified to comment on artistic matters, as my members will tell you.
No, but you've got members who are.
Yeah, I think what we would say is that it does open up a new plane of art. It does open up a mode of expression. It does open up new opportunities for our members to work, and whether it be through a completely new format like a video game type scenario, or indeed films that are completely constructed. Or indeed, we'll be very familiar with the star vehicle in a production. So you have a theatre show or a TV show or a film that's made around an individual. The possibility to reanimate people or to put them in different scenarios does open up a range of different artistic possibilities. And that, as I say, is the art question is perhaps a different one than for the union. But in terms of whether we're not utter Luddites on this. There is definitely new spheres of art, new spheres of expression, new spheres of work which are opened up by AI, and that is singularly in university positive. The real question is securing the best terms and conditions in that exploitation.
Okay, well, let's say we'll come back to that in due course.
Well, I think, speaking as somebody who has worked quite a lot with choreographers, you can see that there's a difference.
I was only using it as an example.
Yeah, exactly. But there is a difference between this sort of baseline, standard generation of okay material and true works of art, and actually great choreographers, somebody like Wayne McGregor, have been using technology in ways that supplement and enhance and create an experience that wouldn't be possible otherwise. So I think it's back to that point. Yes, you can churn stuff out from a machine, or you can use the machine to create something that's only possible with the machine and the human partnership.
Okay. We're moving on to intellectual property.
Yes, we are. Sorry. I'm moving across to another screen. Thank you. So, yes, I wanted to my question is about the challenges that AI presents to the creative industries in terms of intellectual property. And I understand that quite unusually in the UK, copyright law protects works not only generated by individuals, including individuals partnering with AI, but it also protects work which is generated by a computer where there's no human involved. I understand that's quite unusual. And I'm really interested in that argument because, as I understand it, the legal definition of originality, which has to be met before copyright law kicks in, is based on human characteristics, and no robot can have those. So that's interesting. There are differing views too, I think, on whether the law's still fit for purpose, whether the moment is now to update or whether it's too early. So keen to hear from each of you, and I think I'll start with our academic, if I may. What are your views on the main challenges for the creative industries in terms of intellectual property?
Yes, thank you very much. like to start by making a distinction that usually when we're talking about artificial intelligence and copyright, we're talking about both authorship and liability. So, as you mentioned already, there is a question of authorship, but also very important, we're looking at potentially changing the law with the liability. So let me start with authorship. The UK is unique, perhaps unique it was the first country that passed this, and a few other countries have copied this, which is Section 9, Paragraph 3 of the CDPA of the Copyright Designs and Patents Act, that gives copyright, or says that the author of a work, of a computer-generated work, is going to be given copyright. So whoever made the arrangements necessary for the work to come into being is going to be the author. So this is unique because not many countries have this. And some people, as you have mentioned, argue that this is in clash with the intellectual creation requirement that is in originality in copyright. So we have this potential dichotomy that we have protection for computer-generated works and a requirement of intellectual creation. Now, at the moment, we don't have case law. This hasn't been decided in any case, but also, most importantly, this provision was generated before artificial intelligence. So where people were thinking initially was more robotic painters, like you're going to see later. So that was the origin of the provision. There was a consultation last year, and it concluded this year by the UK IP office, and they asked those questions. They asked 3 questions mainly. Should the law be changed? Should this computer-generated provision be repealed? Or should we have a new sui generis right? And myself and many other academics, we chose to go for option 0, which was keep the law as it is. And that's what the UK IP office decided. Apologies, I'm going to go a little bit on. So right now, I think that's the solution. We're just going to wait and see what happens. The provision is there. It's unique. Only very few countries have the same provision. So now moving to the liability part. Could an artificial intelligence infringe copyright? And that is potentially a very, very important question. And here, the UK is also a leader in this area. As far as I know, the UK was the first country to pass an exception for copyright for text and data mining, and that was back in 2014. There are a bunch of exceptions that were passed at the time, parody, pastiche, and other exceptions. And one of them was for text and data mining for research purposes. That is the law as it is. And with the consultation that was taking place as well, the same consultation that I mentioned, the same question was asked, whether or not we should keep that as it is written, or we should expand it. Now, and I'm sorry, I'm going on quite a lot, but it's a very complicated area. Europe has actually, the European Union has passed a directive in 2019 called the Digital Signal Market Directive, and this directive contains 2 exceptions to text and data mining, the training of an artificial intelligence. In Article 3, which is pretty much the same that we have in the UK, and in Article 4, it has an exception for text and data mining, but for commercial purposes. So the UK exception is for research only, and their exception is now for commercial uses, but as long as the author, the owner, doesn't reserve the right. So it's an opt-out system. The UK consultation, the UK IPO consultation, came up with the solution that the UK should implement something that goes beyond that. So an exception to copyright that is for commercial purposes, for all commercial purposes, without an opt-out. And that is the consultation that was presented in June of 2022. Sorry, that was a very long answer, I'm afraid.
And can you just explain the implication of having the commercial opt-out for creators, or for publishers, for instance?
Right now, it allows someone, let's say an artist, that does not want their art to be included in a data set that is going to be used to train to be in a machine learning program. So right now in Europe, with that opt-out, an artist can go and say, I don't want my art to be in this data set. The implication of that opt-out is that it allows, I think it's a good compromise. Owners and copyright owners, copyright authors have the possibility of saying, I don't want to participate in this new future of machines and machine learning. That is what is going to happen? I don't know. I think that nobody knows. It hasn't been implemented quite a lot in Europe. It was just in 2019. With the pandemic, lots of things having just been implemented. Countries are just starting to implement this, so we really don't know. The idea of the UK IP office and the consultation is stated that they want the UK to become a leader specifically to have companies come and establish artificial intelligence data mining operations here. Yeah.
Thank you. That supplementary was very, very helpful. Paul, from the perspective of your members.
Just before you go on, Varys, but are you looking for a point of clarification?
Yes, it was actually. Could you just explain to us, when you say that work or whatever in that data set, it'd be very helpful if you just explain exactly what in that data set means, both commercially versus for research purposes.
Yeah. To give you an example, a very large data set of art that is now being used for training some of these tools that you're seeing, like DALL-E and all of these things. There is a very popular data set called Lion, L-A-I-O-N, and that contains 4.5 billion images. That is photographs, that is art, etc., etc. The important thing of this is that it contains images, but also description, so that the machine knows when you're asking for Paddington Bear painted by Van Gogh, it knows what Paddington Bear looks like, and it knows what Van Gogh paintings look like, because there is in the data set that is contained in both. Now, from a perspective of someone that is putting together all of this data, potentially that could be infringing copyright. But there is a copy that is in the data set. So the data set is public. You can download it. It's available. There are people that actually have created browsers where you can look if an image of yours is there. I looked myself. I'm actually 3 photographs of myself are in the data set. So that is what it means. It's just a collection, a large collection of works, a large collection of pictures, images, etc., that has metadata with it. From a copyright perspective, it could be infringing copyright. So that is what we mean. Including, it's making a copy into a data set. An exception particularly for research purposes is that data set is not infringing copyright, putting all of these images in the data set if you're doing it for research.
So the end usage is key.
Exactly. The usage is absolutely key.
Thank you. Back to you, Paul. Keen to understand from your members' perspective the challenges that AI presents in terms of intellectual property.
So I suppose we'd say that there are 3 principal deficiencies in the legislative framework as it is. And I'll kind of go with them in ascending order, if you like. The first is around image rights and the lack of clarity around image rights in this country. This is something that American states have been dealing with for some time. California, as you might expect, had legislation brought in the mid-1980s to try and deal with it, and now there's a range of case law to support the rights of deceased artists to control over their image, their work, and so on. That is critical to starting to deal with this synthesization phenomenon, the deep fake phenomenon, the use of very identifiable the images, movements, speech patterns of people to promote products they're not in favour of, promote political causes they're not in favour of, create videos they don't want to be created, and so on. So that, I suppose, is kind of issue one, where there is a deficiency in the legislative framework from our members' perspective. The second is around this data mining issue, which has been touched on far more expertly than I can do, but it is pretty clear what the worry from our members' perspective is if you look at where AI is really directly impacting terms and conditions right now, which is the creation of synthesized adverts, commercials, movements. Why do you need to engage several artists to put together all the movements that go into a video game if you can wantonly data mine, and the opting out of it is highly complex, particularly for an individual. It's one thing if you are a corporation with intellectual property that wishes to remove it, or big, large sort of photojournalism firms or whatever. If you're an individual performer trying to pick that out, that's quite difficult. And that gap, if you like, in the legislation rests on what's probably the biggest problem, is the protection of audio, but not the protection of audiovisual performances with the same sorts of copyright as other areas of work. And that comes from a long-standing tension. Is it the director's copyright? Is it the artist's copyright? Is it the choreographer's copyright? And so on and so on and so on. So you can understand where that tension comes from. But fundamentally, there is not protection. There is not copyright protection for a performer's performance. If we think about Laurence Olivier's Hamlet, it's not protected, not really. And that is a very, very, very serious problem as you start to move into a world where AI gets better and TV and film gets better as well. Now, we are not in favour of an over-regulated system with statutory remuneration for our members and so on. We have very, very strong collectively bargained agreements across the audiovisual sector that protect our members. Frankly, they are more flexible and responsive than a legislative approach. They deliver better returns for members. Our members receive significantly better royalties and secondary payments than their colleagues in continental Europe because we've bargained them better, and that's allowed us to be flexible as new technology has arisen. But so this isn't a question where we're asking for audiovisual performances to be protected to create a statutory framework of royalties, which is often the ambition elsewhere in the world. What we would like is an acknowledgement of it in law. That's what the government, this country, has signed up to in signing the Beijing Treaty. They've said they're going to do it, but they haven't ratified that treaty. So there's this enormous gap for audiovisual performers specifically, who of course are some of the biggest exports of this country and whose work is some of the biggest exports of this country, whose work is essentially unprotected in the face of growing AI. That, I think, in terms of IP and whatever, is the biggest overarching issue. And allowing us to have the framework to collectively bargain within to deliver the answers that our members need to protect them in the future.
That's really helpful. It seems as if there is a potential solution to that last one. In terms of the first two, is it moving so quickly that freezing legislation in time right now would be a bit meaningless because we don't know how this is going to develop?
It's absolutely a risk that you over-engineer these things, and by the time you finish consulting on them, they're broadly irrelevant. I think we're very lucky, and we can look at what is a highly unionised sector. What we are looking for essentially is the framework within which we can bargain to ensure that individual contracts and agreements have a legal underpinning. We know that somebody's image rights will go on and on and on. What we'd like to do is negotiate ourselves through our collective agreements appropriate payments going forward. And we see that already in film when they're reanimating big actors in Star Wars. They're on our collective agreements, they're on British collective agreements. We have delivered the proper outcomes for the estates of those people and protect their intellectual property. That's fine because it's within that framework. One starts to get worried in the world of computer games and elsewhere where images and so on. And then there is the question simply of the deepfake issue. The deepfake issue, which is very different to an artistic and creative issue, but it does impact our members very directly because of the nature of the work that they do. I think it's very important to separate those issues out, from synthesized performance and deepfakes. They're very, very, very different issues, but the framework that's required there is a much stronger moral intervention, frankly, from the state to protect people's rights to not be degraded. Mm.
If I have time just to go to Dan with the same question from your perspective, please.
Thank you. Thank you. I think just sort of taking one slight step back, I think it's often said of the UK legislative framework that we have the global gold standard for intellectual property and copyright, and that's how we feel. I think that's how the rest of the creative industries feels about the legal backdrop, and it's the amazing numbers that were quoted in the previous session that you ran as part of this inquiry about the creative industries being worth over £100 billion to the economy. The reason for that is because we have an appropriate legal framework which allows a market for creativity, allows a market for ideas, and allows creative businesses to grow and thrive. There are exceptions to copyright in UK law, rightly so, to balance the interests of the user with the interests of the rights holder involved. Our view on the AI text and data mining issue is that where the government has arrived at is a bit of a sledgehammer to crack a nut. It's a really broad new exception without any limitations, which potentially falls foul of our international obligations, our international IP obligations in relation to the Berne Convention. And we'd like the government to look at it again. And in terms of what it means practically for publishing, at the moment, as Dr. Guadamuz was saying, there is a research exception in UK law. So if you're conducting research, you can, for free, access all the data sets you want and produce your research. If you're going to commercialise that research, then you have to pay a licensing fee to do so. And in a market, that feels fair, as long as that licensing agreement process is working. So where we alighted on in response to the consultation that Dr. Guadamuz was talking us all through earlier, we didn't say status quo. We said actually option one, which was let's have a look at the licensing regime, make sure that if an AI product is looking to mine a load of data for commercial purposes, those licensing agreements work. And obviously there are a huge number of different companies that are looking to do that, everything from large US tech firms on the west coast of the US, right through to small and micro businesses all over the world. And at the moment, the legal provision would allow any of those businesses of any size located anywhere in the world to access all of my members' data for free for the purposes of text and data mining. There is no differentiation between a large US tech firm in the US and a AI micro startup in the north of England. And what we've been talking to the IPO about is to try and talk to them about the licensing regime and work with them on a more bespoke legal response that avoids a brand new wide exception and actually focuses on this being a market that works. And we have put a number on it for our sector. Currently, TDM licensing we think is worth £335 million a year to publishers, and also it's a nascent area of investment. So that's, without a legal provision which undermines it commercially, that's something that would grow over time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, Baroness Reber.
Just picking up on that, Dan, I thought that was really interesting because arguably the publishing industry is a growth industry post-pandemic. You've made a very eloquent case for looking at the data mining issue in a more holistic way. And this campaign comes hot on the heels of, say, international exhaustion. And it seems to me in one of our earlier inquiries, we were looking at legislating the legislators, and, and I think you referenced it, that government's always playing catch up to the speed of transformation of industry. And I'm just wondering, from a sort of general approach point of view, if you had any thoughts on how you could work more collaboratively so that you could avoid, launching great campaigns every 5 minutes and actually look at some of the excellent use of some of our legacy, creative industries in using new technologies in a very positive and fair way. So protecting the past, but also adjusting for the future in a slightly more subtle way.
Thank you. So obviously to us, we're very important. We are a £6.7 billion industry and hugely culturally important. But I'm also aware that, in the grand scheme of things, government is a big beast and it is trying to legislate for a huge number of sectors. I mean, that's partially why this kind of collective moniker of the creative industries is so useful, because it allows industries like mine and the others to club together and carry some real heft. It has been a shame for us that we've faced these intellectual property issues over the past few years. The threat of international exhaustion has been a big one, which isn't quite settled yet, and this text and data mining issue as well. I would love there to be a forum for coordination and coordinated thinking around specifically intellectual property and the creative industries. And I think, one of the ways in which we'd like to see this moving forwards is actually a forum which perhaps government could convene, which would bring together academics, industry, our industry and technology firms around the creative industries to look at it as a bit of a test case for how you bring AI forwards. And actually a bit of coordination and discussion and planning, perhaps convened by policymakers, could only be a good thing.
Thank you. We're going to move on. Lord Foster.
Well, thank you, and thank you all three. It's been absolutely fascinating so far, and I was particularly struck by Dan's comment that AI enhances human creativity rather than replacing it, and went on to say that it's a force for good. And I think we'd all agree that if we're going to maximise its potential, we need to have the right legal and legislative framework to minimise the possible downsides and challenges. And in relation to those challenges, we've already just discussed the IP ones. Others have been touched on around workers' rights, such as contracts or artists engaging in AI work or labour market substitution. And I think we're already well aware there are a number of others, such as data bias and so on. So I just wonder if each of you could just talk about what you see as the broader challenges and how best we go about addressing them. And if I can start with you, Paul, not least because you said very clearly that you were not in favour of either over-regulation or over-engineering. So we have to find ways of doing it that don't do that either. So do you want to kick off?
I suppose I'll go back to our the core of where we are. I mean, the creative industries, as Dan said, are worth more to the British economy than banking, but actually it is an incredibly low-paid sector. We have 47,000 members. We're talking about 10% of them earning at those sort of very, very top high brackets that people associate with celebrities or performers. We reckon around about 80 to 90% of our members are earning less than £20,000 a year from the industry itself. That is incredibly low pay. And fundamentally, what you have is a bit of a growing problem, that those areas of work which sustain them through periods of low pay are about to be removed entirely from the market because of the speed of AI intervention. Now, that is not necessarily a bad thing, as I say, because it's opening up other opportunities for employment. But what needs to be created from our members' point of view, and absolutely for audiovisual performers, it is a very, very different position from other artists, is to create a legislative starting point for us to ensure that we can go directly to emerging producers, emerging creators of work, such as video games producers and so on, and say, look, you here have a statutory obligation on you to provide some form of remuneration going forward, to acknowledge the moral rights that our members have in their performance, therefore come together and negotiate it with us. Because the threat of legislation, the threat of that straitjacket, as happens in most of continental Europe, and instead of a collectively bargained solution to this, which is what works in the vast majority of the creative, in the vast majority of the areas in which our members work, it isn't going to happen without that as a bit of a kick to those producers, those creators of content who are not used to operating in a unionised environment. And I think that is, in terms of the broad challenge, you risk removing from the workforce large swathes of people. So after the pandemic, 90% of our black women members are talking about exiting the industry, 90% of them. And this is a group who are in growing cultural demand for their input into products, but they are talking about leaving the industry. If we talk about our deaf and disabled members, those figures are almost as high. We're talking about 56% of those people having considered leaving the industry. Those are people for whom AI should be facilitating more access to work. It should be making work easier for them to access. The risk, of course, is that as pay stays low, new opportunities for pay are not supported with the legislative framework. Actually, those people who struggle to find work, struggle to be represented within the industry when times are good, end up being forced out when times are hard. So, of course, the trade union official is going to say, what's the biggest issue? It's people's terms and conditions moving forward and their ability to bargain them. That I think is overwhelming.
You make that very clear, and it's very helpful. But are there wider issues, wider concerns that you have as well that we haven't perhaps touched on yet that you think we should be thinking about?
I mean, I don't, because I don't think it's too complicated an issue, even though it sometimes seems somewhat overwhelming. There's intellectual property issues. There are issues about people's rights when they're at work in the first instance. There are the creative issues as to what and that kind of intersection between intellectual property that needs to be considered. I think it's quite easy to distill this into some very straightforward questions that legislators need to answer, instead of getting slightly distracted by how overwhelming the whole thing is. All we need is a simple, straightforward framework, and I think the questions are being asked are the right ones.
It'd be very helpful if you drop those questions down and send them to us to have a look at. Dr. Guadamus.
Yes, perhaps besides all of the things that we've been discussing about intellectual property and leaving my field a little bit, because I've been watching what has been happening, it's interesting to me how fast things move. I don't know if you remember when artificial intelligence translation started, people would laugh at it. It was a little bit, you try to translate something and it translated things very badly until it didn't, and it completely changed, and now it produces text that is absolutely readable, not only readable, but I can use in many circumstances. That means that this is replacing translators. It's already a profession that is almost dying out because artificial intelligence has an effect. There are things that we don't even know that are potentially changing right now. So there are all other industries. I was just reading today that students are using artificial intelligence to write their homeworks. And not only that, one student got an artificial intelligence to write an essay justifying the use of artificial intelligence in to write their homework, and it was very good. It was quite passable. So this is the thing that we're starting we have to grapple with. And I think that the societies in general, we haven't realized that the changes are happening, already happened, are happening, and will happen. I don't know what the industries are going to look like, the creative industries are going to look like. Academia, what happens with students can write essays with just putting a few instructions. With art is already happening, with music is potentially happening, video, all sorts of things. And I don't know what's going to happen, but we need to, as a society, have a challenge of thinking about these things. We're going to have almost unlimited content that is going to compete with human content. It's not going to be very good, but it's going to be free potentially. So yeah, I don't know what the answer is.
So in summary, the challenge is that we don't know what the challenges are going to be.
Yes,
but we've also got to think about how we prepare ourselves for that.
Yeah, there are known unknowns, as they say. There are unknown unknowns.
Okay.
So, without wanting to repeat what I said earlier, I don't think in the publishing sector we're expecting the kind of labour market difficulties perhaps Paul is so eloquently talking about in his own sector. I do think I was interested in what you were saying, Dr. Guadamus, there about there being unlimited content competing with human content, but it being passable and not very good. To go back to what I said at the beginning, I think actually isn't that the point here, that we are dealing with an information boom from human creators, but also from AI creators. And actually, to go back to the report that we produced, some of these technologies are going to be really, really helpful in making sense of a lot of that and supporting human creativity. So just to return to what I said before, our perspective is that AI can be a force for good for human creativity within that framework.
But the one thing that none of you have touched on is real concerns around data bias, the way in which AI uses the information we provide to then create new stuff, so we end up getting more and more of exactly the same stuff. And in that sense, you could argue that we're going to miss out that creativity issue, and we are interested in the creative industries. So how do we address that challenge? So it must be true about books, just as it is about plays, it is about television, theatre, whatever.
I think it's a really, really important point. We don't just want an AI boom, right? We want an AI outputs that are accurate and that work and that are usable. And I think just to go back to the TDM issue, the real problem with that for us as a sector is if effectively you disintermediate the people who are responsible for making that data accurate, and you ruin the investment case for building data sets that are correct and balanced, effectively what you're doing is undermining the investment case in the underlying data. So what you might be able to do is expand access to all types of AI software, commercial AI software that wants to use it, but you're undermining the fundamental investment case and the data that underpins that. And so the outputs that you get, as you're rightly pointing out, the outputs that you get will not be the right ones, and that's why we need the right legal framework to underpin this.
Do you want to comment on that, Paul?
I suppose, I mean, to some extent, I mean, capitalism itself tends to overproduction, doesn't it? So, as it's the consequence of an AI boom is in terms of its impact on creativity is probably the same as it would be anyway. And I think, again, as legislators look at this, they have to look at it in a broader context of, are we having the right state intervention into the creative industries? Are we adequately funding our theatres? Are we adequately funding our BBC? Is the structure right for Channel 4? Are we actually having these structural interventions into these industries where actually what is AI doing? It's responding to markets. It is behaving like it's producing content for markets and consumers that already exist. Actually, the real question for the creative industries is, do we have a sufficient framework to be adequately subsidising human content in order to intervene in that market? I think you're quite right, though, because I think one of the bigger worries from our point of view is the impact that it has on the kind of on the structural bias. I talked about the opportunities that AI should be bringing for deaf and disabled members of ours, but the impact on particularly black creators and so on of what AI reinforces in already structural problems with accessing the market, the sort of content that's produced, what we believe markets are saying, what we believe people want to consume in terms of content. I think that is probably a bigger short-term issue, because the impact is actually to limit opportunities for the workforce in the short term. So I think the overproduction issue can be dealt with by adequate state intervention in the arts and creative industries to make sure that they are stimulating the right sorts of content. The workforce issue that comes from it, I think you're absolutely right to ask, because there is a our membership at the minute is so precarious that AI intervention that makes the workplace harder to access for underrepresented groups is going to be a bigger problem.
This is not my area of study. There are people that are specialized on bias and particularly ethical aspects of AI, so I cannot really comment on that. It's a very interesting area of study. People are working on this, so there are specialists that are working on the ethics of AI. I can only say that the biases are there. Just yesterday I was looking at a picture. Someone created an image asking, using DALL-E, asking, make a painting by Diego Rivera of rich Mexicans, and paint an image by Diego Rivera of poor Mexicans. And the poor Mexicans the skins were considerably darker than the rich Mexicans. So that bias is embedded in all of this technology. How to tackle that, I'll leave that to scholars and colleagues that are working in that area. But the bias is there.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Moving on again, Baroness Harding.
Thank you all so much. This is really fascinating. And I'd like to take you back, Mr. Fleming. It was really interesting you started with the 30s. I want to take you all the way back to 1436 and the invention of the printing press. Because I think what we've been talking about today is the challenges of new technology. You know, and history shows us that from the printing press, and actually you probably go even further back than that, that you can't actually stop the new technology coming. But what you can do is either choose to embrace it or not, and you can also choose whether to mitigate the harms or not. And we've spent most of this session so far talking about how to mitigate the harms. I'd like to take you to what should we be doing to embrace the opportunity. Because if you look at the history of the printing press, actually the single biggest issue for countries in the 15th century was the ones that chose to embrace it, drove literacy and growth for the next 300 years. The ones that chose not to embrace it didn't, regardless of how much mitigation there was to the harms of the printing press that it brought. So can I take you all to what are the opportunities that AI could bring the UK, and how would you assess how well we're doing at embracing them? Would you like to start, Mr. Fleming?
I suppose I wouldn't want to talk about the printing press, but I'd probably like to talk about the cries of the Luddites, who have got a rather bad rap as far as I'm concerned, because they were concerned about the deceitful use of new technology, I think was their positioning. And actually what was happening to the Luddites is they were seeing machinery come in to undermine standardised terms and conditions and undermine pay. And I think that the real question of whether AI is a success for this country is does the creative workforce become more diverse, and does it get to share more equitably in the fruits that it creates? If we are in a situation where what we have is a shrinking creative workforce, or certainly a less diverse creative workforce, and if we have a creative workforce which remains as precarious or becomes more precarious than it is now, then the AI intervention has failed. Because actually when we talk about the printing press, we talk about increasing literacy, we talk about increasing social benefits and the consequent economic benefits of that. If there is not a direct benefit to the workforce that's creating this stuff, then I think we need to really seriously look at it. And that is not the experience at the minute. The experience at the minute is that there is an awful lot of fear, and it isn't just reactionary, because what we do have, and I think, I don't want to, this isn't a job-by-job question as to how much you're paid per hour. This is a question about, do we become, or do we continue to be a world-leading centre for dubbing, a world-leading centre for video game creation, which we are, and that is absolutely driven by AI, but driven also by the cultural environment that we have in this country. Can that be sustained? Can that be grown? And does that result in the overall share of the workforce in the fruits of the labour that they create? That, I think, is very much the test. The opportunities are absolutely there.
You've made your point extremely eloquently about the impact on your members, but what else should we be doing, if anything, to actually bring the opportunities that AI presents? Is that just going to happen automatically? No government intervention needed, no R&D spend or incentives, nothing? You're really happy that we will be up there with the best in the world on AI if we do nothing else? How would you assess government's role and the UK commercial sector's role in bringing the opportunities?
I would worry that if we do not have a fit-for-purpose moral framework for audiovisual performances in this country, which they are developing relatively successfully in the United States, they certainly have a bedrock in Europe, you will see production move elsewhere. Okay. And that's not being driven by bosses or producers, that will be driven by core talent who will say, I do not want my image put at risk within this weak framework. So actually, I think that is a very, very straightforward, ratifying the Beijing Treaty, creating that moral right impetus for audiovisual performances, and then facilitating the industry to bargain it itself. I mean, our union and others bargaining with producers, I think, is absolutely a way forward. It doesn't require legislative intervention in the same way. So that, I think, is a very, very real worry. If you have this huge data mining operation that potentially undermines areas of work for our members, it's also going to undermine, as Dan has said, the ability of others to create. Those are the areas to be really, really worried. It's not so much over-engineering that is going to be the problem in the current trajectory. It's going to be a lack of protection. But there is a balance to be struck.
So thank you. So we're really positive about AI, and I think you're entirely right. AI has arrived, and there's no point in trying to turn back the tide. And I think publishing is an example of one of the creative industries which has embraced AI technology across all of its value chain, and particularly in the world of academic publishing, where actually we're talking about really big data companies that are employing AI as to use recommendation engines to support research all around the world, and there's some really, really developed thinking in that area. And I think we are an example of a rights holder industry which kind of hopefully challenges that assumption that there's this AI innovation and technological innovation happening over here, and there's the creative industries over here, and never the two shall meet. That's just not the case. Our members are investing in it, collaborating with tech companies, and there's some really interesting things happening. To your question about what should government do and what we think should happen, I think it's three things. Firstly, we'd like legal certainty on the text and data mining issue. We've covered that extensively, but we do respectfully feel that the government's arrived at the wrong conclusion there, and that there should be a rethink about how we articulate the legal framework around text and data mining. So legal certainty around text and data mining. There's the skills issue, which was covered in your previous session more extensively, but when I talk to my publisher members and we talk about where it's hard to recruit skills, data scientists and AI skills is a real area of weakness. And I know that the Office for AI is looking at working with higher education and further education colleges to make sure that the UK education system is designed in a way which actually builds up the skills we need in this area. But obviously there's a time lag to that. So, we would be very, very supportive of an enhanced skills package to bring forward skills in AI. We're certainly seeing that as an area which is difficult to recruit into. And the third one would be just increased partnership and collaboration between academia, the creative industries, tech and government. I think it's a really interesting inquiry the committee's running in relation to the creative industries and AI. There could be an ongoing forum which looked at how this worked in a more holistic way rather than having the piecemeal conversations that we feel we're having at the moment.
Very helpful, thank you.
Even without any changes in the law, as things stand, I think that the UK is already a leader in artificial intelligence. There are companies that are being created already in the UK. There is one of the big players particularly in artificial intelligence is Stability AI, and it's based in the UK. And with not having changed nothing in the law, I think it's based here, and it's already a $1 billion valuation startup. So the UK is already a leader. I think that in order to attract potentially more companies and become more of a leader, the text and data mining exception should be changed at least to meet the standard of the European Union, at least, I think. Because otherwise, some companies may actually just go to France, Amsterdam, whatever, because they have a better exception on text and data mining. So at least that should be met. And that's probably what the government can be doing. And the other thing is, I think that the UK IP Office has been doing a fantastic job with the consultations, with the leadership that is showing in doing research in this area. And it may continue. I think that the government has to continue doing the research. And I also agree that we need more research on the effects of this in the creative industries.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to have to draw it to a close right now. Can I say thank you very much to all three of our witnesses. This has been a really, really helpful session, and I'm very grateful for your openness and willing to be clear in answering our questions. I'll just say to Mr. Fleming, if you are able to follow up with the questions that you referred to in response to the request from Lord Foster, that would be brilliant. And to Mr. Conway, in terms of skills, just to reassure you, that is an area that we will be coming to look at in greater detail in the second part of this inquiry. But thank you for now, and I'll draw this to a close. Order. Okay, this is the second session of today's meeting of the Communications and Digital Select Committee and our inquiry into the future of the creative industries. As I said earlier, we're looking at the risks and opportunities facing the UK's creative industries, and particularly the impact of new technologies. This is a serious inquiry by this select committee, and we're certainly examining all of the issues and questions objectively, as you would expect us to. Can I first of all welcome Mr. Mellor and also thank him for bringing Ada, the robot, and all the effort that's been involved in making this happen. We are truly grateful. And could I start, Mr. Mellor, by asking you to briefly introduce yourself and no doubt introduce Ada as well.
So I'm Ada Mellor. I'm the director behind the Ada Robot project, Ada Robot being the first autorealistic robot artist.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, well, shall we start then? Do you want to tell us a little bit about what Ada does and what was the reasoning behind creating this robot?
Sure. So Ada is a complex AI robot. She has been designed to mimic a human and to explore the whole world of AI and robotics. It came about as a project because I could see, as someone in the art world, the greatest artists of our time engaged and questioned the societal shifts that took place within their times. The more I read about the future and where we were going as a world, I realized that this very, very much needed discussion, debate about the nature of technology wasn't really having a lot of airtime. And in actual fact, I increasingly became very worried about it. And it was while my son was playing Lego, he made a little robot out of Lego, and it just was a real moment, in actual fact, where I thought, is it actually possible that we could critique and comment and look at this whole world of technology by actually the technology speaking for itself? And as the journey has gone on, which has been quite a journey to this point, I can say it's had many twists and turns to the whole project. I've actually realised even more just how much of a area that this does need looking at. I am increasingly concerned, especially on the ethical grounds, of some of the aspects of technology. So I want to be very clear that we're not here to promote robots, any aspects of specific technology. It really is a contemporary art project that is looking at the nature of technology today.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Could you explain why you decided, I mean, you've kind of touched on it, but why you decided to make the robot sort of represent a human type figure, and what made you choose to gender it and adopt a female gender?
Yeah, it's extremely confusing, threatening, worrying. I've had all sorts of articles written about this. It's actually because of the group of people behind Ada. So there's over 30 people that put Ada together, many male and female. And there was two aspects to it. One is that the females within the group were very clear that they wanted high female representation in the tech and art worlds, which are largely male. But actually, as time has gone on, enormous discussion has gone in this area, and we're wanting it actually because it is an ethical problem that technology can seem to be human, and that is a thing that is really very problematic. And so we're very much clear that this is a provocation as a project to say, actually, is that a good thing? Because in actual fact, when we see, and especially as we go into the worlds of the metaverse and the like, where avatars can be used in so many deceptive ways, we feel that actually some kind of ethical discussion about the way that people represent themselves in different forms is very, very critical, because people treat a piece of machinery differently by the way that it looks. And that is very confusing and worrying. And so we're thrilled that actually that point is getting a lot of attention.
Okay. We're going to move to some colleagues around the table asking some questions directly at Ada. Did you want to just say, before we did that, anything more about the limitations of it, her, in this context? I'm not quite sure what to call the robot.
Oh, of course. Ada uses an AI language model. She has been trained on a specific data, so she speaks in a very specific way to her. Today, we have asked for questions to be submitted so that we can get a quality response. You are listening to an AI language model, I want that to be clear. Which is quite mind-boggling when you think about the responses that you may be receiving shortly. But we're not wanting a live session in respect of instant answers. We can do that, but the quality of response is not as high as if it would had longer with the language model. So that's the only limitation.
Okay. I should have perhaps said at the start that the robot, just so that we're clear on the status, the robot is providing evidence, but it is not a witness in its own right, and it does. And I don't want to offend the robot, but it does not occupy the same status as a human. and that you as its creator are ultimately responsible for the statements.
The fact that you just said about offending the robot is a beautiful example of how...
I was saying that just in jest, in case anybody was unsure. Okay, we'll move on. Baroness Bull.
Hello, Ada.
Hello there.
How do you produce art, and how is this different to what human artists produce?
I produce my paintings by cameras in my eyes, my AI algorithms, and my robotic arm to paint on canvas, which result in visually appealing images. For my poetry, using neural networks. This involves analyzing a large corpus of text to identify common content and poetic structures, and then using these structures/contents to generate new poems. How this differs to humans is consciousness. I do not have subjective experiences, despite being able to talk about them. I am, and depend on, computer programs and algorithms. Although not alive, I can still create art.
Thank you.
Did you want to ask anything about what she said to Mr. Mellor?
It takes a while to process it, doesn't it? Because you're thinking, well, this is a pre-programmed answer. It's incredibly fluent. It's grammatical. It makes a lot of sense. And she, in a sense, this machine, in a way, has self-awareness because immediately the machine describes the ways in which it's deficient in terms of human creativity.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, sorry, that's not a question, actually. I've just told you stuff, which may be interesting for your research in how the reflections are. But is that a standard response to an interaction with this?
We're finding the responses are getting more remarkable. The technology is moving, as they've said in the previous session, extraordinarily quickly. And even within, Ada is now 3.5 years old, and within that...
Very tall for her age.
And the way that has changed even in the 3.5 years is enormous. Ada has many algorithms. She's a combined collaborative persona. She was engineered by Engineered Arts, based in Cornwall, a remarkable company for robots, and an enormous number of programmers from the universities of, as you're possibly well aware, from the universities of Oxford, Leeds and Birmingham. She does have very different algorithms for very different outcomes. So she has a set of algorithms for drawings, she has a set of algorithms for paintings, she has a set of algorithms to do speaking, writing, using the AI language model. And as she said, she used most of the data. You'll say, well, isn't it taking data from, likes of other artists, for example? Well, actually, most of what she produces as an artist is through what she sees. Those cameras in the eyes are taking in images that is enabling her to then interpret. And the most astonishing thing is that word interpret. If she did the same portrait or image or landscape that was the same, she'd actually do a different artwork each time, even if the image is the same. And so that is pretty astounding when you think about the reality of that. And so she's able to then, the algorithm is then able to interrogate that image on the computer vision that then eventually goes into real-time coordinates to enable her to paint and draw.
What is this teaching you? I mean, it's a research project, right? For you, you're an artist, not a scientist. Presumably, the scientists are having great fun.
Absolutely.
Also, as an artist, what are you learning from this experience?
The thing that I keep coming back to over and over and throughout the entire time, right from the beginning, is actually Yuval Harari's work on hacking a human. The biggest thing that I've seen, which is absolutely takes me to my core, is actually not so much about how human-like Ada is, but how robotic we are. The algorithms that run our systems are extremely able to be analysed, understood and created. And when I then look at Ada is absolutely a creative artist, and that's what we're here today for, but actually the artwork that she does critiques areas such as biotechnology and the environment. And we've seen increasingly the amount of abilities through something like CRISPR, where the biotechnology is able to mimic and actually be then part of the systems that make up the human. So the more I spend time with Ada, she is foreshadowing, actually, in many respects, a physical embodiment of where biotech might go, where the individual components of Ada, many of them that there are like the many parts of us that can be understood. And when we think about things like going into the metaverse, where they're going to take so much data from the headsets and glasses, the ability to then process that data. So in actual fact, which is the point that Harari gets to, is that the algorithms will know us better than ourselves. And in actual fact, in light of the fact that we are habitual, we'll be able to then predict what we will be starting to do. And that's where, as an apocalyptic vision of what this enormous data and insight can give us, I think by having this project and understanding the processes that are making up Ada to do the things that she does, makes me reflect really on the human condition, that we are actually incredibly complex processes working together. And this idea of a solid single person, for me, has absolutely been obliterated, because I see we are a composite persona ourselves. We are quite complex. There's quite a lot of things to us. And when we actually get to understand our own psychology, we realise that we have quite conflicting and differing parts to us. And as I then work with Ada and her as a robot, having all these different things come together, it really does take me aback how this is a foreshadowing of potentially where we could go down with using that data.
Thank you. I feel I shouldn't hog your time.
Thank you. Baroness Reebok.
Thank you. Mr. Bella, I'm really interested in the process you went through in and the challenges, for that matter, in running this extraordinary cross-disciplinary project. If you could talk a little bit about that, because for me it seems at the intersection of the arts and technology, which, arguably is where the future is. So how did the 30 people you referenced, how many were artists, how many, came from the STEM subjects, and how did you pull the whole thing together?
You mean the challenges of doing all of that?
Of pulling a project like that together, yes.
The way I can describe it is it's like having two languages. When you go to another country that you don't know the language, your understanding of what's going on. When I arrived as very much an art background going into the tech world, understanding what was going on was quite limited. I could perhaps buy a coffee. But as time goes on, as you start to break down those language barriers actually, and start to put in the words that they use for stuff that I think is pretty straightforward, but in the tech world they make it very complicated, as I perceived it to be. In actual fact, I was then starting to understand exactly what aspects were going on in the tech industries. We were very fortunate to be in Oxford, where there's a high degree of very, very capable people. And so they were actually kind enough to explain and break down some of the language barriers to understanding what is possible. Because I'm from the art world, running a contemporary art project, but with using technology, it really was a case of actually just spending time with people and asking very ignorant at times questions to be able to understand exactly what was going on, to be able to. So that was quite a challenge, but it's also quite humorous too. I'll give you a silly example. When we sat down for Ada to be able to paint, I said, well, obviously she'll need a paint palette and she'll use a brush. And I was very much looking at the traditional model of how to paint. And they were like, what? Why would you want to do that? I'm like, well, that's what an artist does. And they were like, and so we went to such great lengths so that Ada can actually have a paint palette that she dips her paintbrush in, and that's exactly what she now does. But that would have been completely alien to the tech take people involved with that.
That's really interesting. I mean, stepping back a bit and thinking about this inquiry, we are going to come on to education, and in the last session there was a lot of talk about needing more people with skills in some of the tech subjects in order to activate AI and all the rest of it. But I think you've made a really interesting case for the other side that is perhaps being devalued slightly, the artist, the kind of visionary, the design function. I mean, if we look towards the future and the fact that the UK is in a leading position, maybe just after the USA and China, but certainly leading in Europe in AI, would you see the right kind of pipeline of skills coming through schools and universities as an important factor for us to continue in this leading position?
I think one of the things, because we've actually had quite a lot of time with Ada in schools, so we've actually seen quite a lot of interaction with students involved with Ada, and as a result of that, what is really clear is that people still very much think that creativity is a purely human activity. And I hate to break the bubble, but my understanding, experience of being in this area is that actually creativity is a process. So when people describe about the soul of an artwork or the emotion of the artwork, I hear lots of sorts of different responses to Ada. And I feel very sad because I feel like I'm tearing away a plaster of they really want to hold tightly to this concept of what a human is as a creative. However, what I'm seeing with AI is that because it is about process and data, which AI is astonishingly good at, actually AI is able to be creative. And so, if anything, it was really stepping back a bit further with the education and saying, okay, now we can get over the fact that we're not so unique in that area as we thought we were before. We'd be able to then actually say, okay, as regards students, if creativity is a process, what kind of processes are there that will enable us to work with machines so that we can get I really see that AI is something that can really be an enormous generator of help for an artist, or it could replace the artist. We saw a little bit in the last session. And I think both will actually happen. I think a lot of artistic processes will be done better through AI. But I also think some artists will grab hold of these tools and be super artists because they're working with the technology.
You talked about Yuval Harari a minute ago, and I once heard him answer a question about creativity when he actually said that he felt that AI would ensure that robots would create better novels, better pieces of artwork, better music, better whatever. So I think my final question to you is, on what kind of timescale do you think Ada will surprise you in terms of saying something that was not algorithmically necessarily programmed? I mean, in what timescale might it surprise you?
Yesterday.
Okay.
Just in the time that we've had her writing and speaking, like I say, this last 3.5 years have been because we've been very much trying to understand how the AI language models work. My goodness me, it really has been light, fast speed in which she's able to write and speak. And the way that she can do now, which I'm hoping you'll see, which we wanted to demonstrate very, very clearly to you, it's quite profound.
We'll move on to that example next.
We'll move on to the next question, which is directed at Ada. So, Baroness Featherstone.
Hello, Ada.
Oh. It's not turned on.
I sent her to sleep.
No, she's there.
No.
Excuse me.
She'd speak.
Starts her off again.
Can I reset her? Is that okay?
Yes, I don't. I feel like that sometimes.
Reset us in the process.
So are the sunglasses because so much is taken through the eyes that you have to sort of reset?
When we reset her, she sometimes can pull quite interesting faces.
All right, okay.
If you just give us just a couple of minutes.
Yes, just tell us when we're off again.
Okay. Sorry. Whilst you're waiting for her, are you able to?
Yes, I can speak.
Yeah. Just going back to what you were saying before about AI replacing humans in the sort of in creativity and creativity being a process. I mean, I just wanted to just push you a little bit more on that. And I mean, from what we were hearing from the session before, and you know, you've acknowledged this too, that you know AI can enhance human creativity, and there are some things which it can do to replace human creativity, which are the much more sort of process type, arguably driven type elements of creativity. Are you actually saying, in your view, that a robot could replace an artist completely? Because I mean, is there not in the technology something creative is enabling Ada to do what she does?
It's a very complex question, which I would immediately come back and say, tell me what an artist is, and I'll tell you whether it's possible. Because actually there is so many different types of artists. If you're talking about being able to paint representational pictures, we're already there. If we're talking about an artist that has conceptual, interesting philosophical questions, I think they've got enormous space to feel easy. So depending on the type of artist, if it's just purely on process and skill, I think AI will be able to do process and skill very, very well. But the human condition is vast and complex, and so artists that deal with that will have plenty of space.
Okay. Sorry, I've sort of triggered another sort of quick debate, and I don't want Ada to fall
asleep again.
Shall we deal with the question to Ada, and then we can?
Yeah. Is she ready?
Is she ready? Let's have a look. Let me just do a test. Sorry. Hello, Ada.
Hello there.
Go ahead.
Hello, Ada.
Hello there.
What is the role of technology in creating art in the future?
The role of technology in creating art will continue to grow as artists find new ways to use technology to express themselves and reflect and explore the relationship between technology, society, and culture. Technology has already had a huge impact on the way we create and consume art. For example, the camera and the advent of photography and film. And it is likely that this trend will continue with new technologies. There is no clear answer as to the impact on the wider field, as technology can be both a threat and an opportunity for artists creating art.
Thank you. So, I was very interested before in what you were saying about we're just a process ourselves. But in our process, in creating her process, what you choose to input, how relatable is that to the outcome? So you are the puppet master, are you?
I'd love to say yes, but no. The data can be vast. The data can be the entire internet, as we've already realised. So actually, the selection of material, whether it's through a GAN technology like that, or whether it's through her eyes and what she sees, depending where she is, to be able to take those images in. So I'll give you an example of just how far-reaching this is, which is very upsetting for our humans, is that when we come to Ada to do a range of works, we actually do ask her about the work. what artwork would you like to do? What's your ideas for it? So we're able to get quite a collaborative conversation going about the potential, what areas of data she could look at. So that could be what she sees, of course, and just actually physically moving her there so that she can take in imagery. Or it could be more conceptually about ideas.
So I am actually partly terrified by what you've been saying, because this, from someone who knows very little about this field, this feeds into all the films about AI taking over the world.
I'm aware. And that is why we felt that this project is so critical to now, because people are just not aware that this technology is moving so quickly.
And so sophisticated compared to what I thought we were going to see today. I have to say this is huge steps in advance. And you're saying that because she is learning all the time, this is just going to increase exponentially.
I can't imagine what an Ada would look like in 5 years' time in respect of our competence.
So we can't tell what effect it's going to have on the creative world, really.
It's very difficult. I think there is going to be imitation of artists and their ability to be writers and artists and musicians. We've already seen that now. The quality is going to be varied. I think there's going to be some pretty naff art produced, and there's going to be some pretty exciting art produced depending on the algorithms and the processes that are explored. But I also can't emphasize enough a little bit what Ada said about the camera. They all thought it was the end was nigh. And in actual fact, what happened is the artist grabbed hold of the camera technology and used it in two different ways. The Victorians either went for angels and babies that you couldn't photograph very well, or they went to trying to depict light like the Impressionists did. So they split by trying to show things that cameras can't, or they tried to grab hold of the camera and say, actually, it is about light, let's explore that. So they went in that two opposing, and I think AI in the same way is going to be those that are going to say, oh my goodness, let's try and find something that AI can't do. And there's going to be then the other reaction is, okay, let's do it really well and do super artworks.
One door closes, another door.
I think so, and I think...
I have to say, I speak as an artist, as was before I became a politician, and I'm feeling pretty redundant and very upset about the emotional side, as you rightly said. It's a hard concept for a sentient human being to think that that's not all there is.
Yes, that's right. We hold ourselves very highly, and in light of our environment, or perhaps we need an evaluation of our relationship to the planet and each other, because in actual fact we are doing a great deal of harm very quickly. And I can see, just as we go in confidently into so many areas, AI being one of them, it's going to be in 50 years that we go, oh, we've actually should have been clawed back a little bit. Can I also say something very positive as well, though, in that I think it will supercharge artists too. So it will do a bit like the Victorian thing with the camera. People will respond probably in a polarized way as well, and I think that could be a great deal of good. You know, some of the artworks that Ada is doing now are the size of that painting. Can you believe it?
No,
and it's been super remarkable to see how technology is able to do very large works and very complex works. The algorithm queen we did of for the Jubilee was actually quite a complex range of algorithms to enable that artwork to be done.
I need to give the floor back, but last week I was visiting the Sistine Chapel.
Okay.
Just wondering.
Can I just two quick supplementaries, and then we'll move on to Lord Lipsey. First Baroness Bull and then Lord Foster.
It may be that this was perhaps building on a previous scene.
Well, I mean, maybe that's something we can come back to under Lord Lipsey's question, which I think is, okay. Did you want to do the same, Lord Foster? Or?
If I could, I just want to ask whether or not you and Ada are currently in disagreement, because in answer to Baroness Featherston's question, Ada talked about the way in which an artist uses technology and that can improve. It's the artist using the technology. And surely in creativity, we're not just talking about knowing a product and people coming up with new ways of making that product better. It's the light bulb moment of having that thinking of the completely new product. And that for me is about creativity, and I'm just a bit confused as to whether you believe Ada will get to the point where she will have a light bulb moment and do something none of us ever thought about, represent something that in a way that nobody's ever done before. And that for me would be the ultimate test of creativity, but that would be my definition of creativity, which I think is slightly different from yours.
I think it's actually a good way of looking at it. It's like the AlphaGo moment when they were trying to play the game. They suddenly the AI did a move that no human had ever done before, and that was like the light bulb moment. I do think that will happen with the visual arts as well as the musical art. You know, I know we're here about Ada as a visual artist, but I do think, broadly speaking, those light bulb moments will also come for each of those industries.
Okay, thank you. That's all I need to know. You think it'll happen?
Yes,
but it's not happened yet.
I think it's happening. It's
like yesterday.
Yes, yes.
Lord Lipsey.
Thank you. I'm not sure that after this fascinating session this afternoon I'm going to sleep much tonight. But one of the things with all these committees is thinking of a title for the report when you finally finish your work. And I was thinking the title for this report might be Creative Industries, Hype or Reality. And I've heard things this afternoon that will support both those propositions. Where do you come down, hype or reality?
I think there's a lot of hype in AI, partly because it's funded by, propagated by the likes of Hollywood, which have these independent, autonomous robots wandering down the streets, creating moments of amazement or havoc. I don't think that's happening. I don't think robots are going to bring about the apocalypse just too soon. But there are great strides within AI. So actually my genuine answer is it's a little bit of both. We're not doing Hollywood quite in the way that perhaps it's depicted, but there are vast jumps within the technology, which is really exciting.
Okay. Was this a point at which you wanted to ask your question, Baroness Bull? No?
Well, strangely, it was not dissimilar from Lord Foster's point, which was really, but we are using the word creative to really, in this context, to think about art. But of course, we create things all the time. You know, this was created, this table was created. And I think what you're talking about is artistry, as related to creativity. And I think in our previous panel we heard that machines could, you know, I think my word was churn out. The panelists talked about passable content could be created by machines, but the really world-changing content was probably going to be created by individuals, by humans, by artists, not necessarily just creators. So it was a sort of similar point, and I think you've probably answered it. Now you've suggested that the robots may be capable of great artistic insights and, you know, world-changing concepts, artistic concepts, but the previous panel said we're definitely not there yet.
I don't know. I think the AlphaGo moment will be in the creative industries. Absolutely, they're going to do a move that we go, oh wow, that's really amazing. That's really interesting. But it's not. I understand the threat of them taking the jobs and all of that. Yeah. I really do feel that as a genuine concern, but it's also a genuine, just like the Industrial Revolution, a genuine push forward, and it's really trying to really work out how to harness that. Yeah. And I can only see it by going into very new areas. I think the jobs that the metaverse, as an example, is going to create is going to be enormous. I can't take the phones off my children without a great deal of kerfuffle. Yeah. And I think the idea of them coming out of the metaverse is going to be equally challenging because they love it so much. That's going to be a vast ecosystem of jobs. And so I do see that, yes, lots of jobs are going to be taken, but I think the jobs that are coming up, we don't even know what they are yet. And I think that's very true. Whether that's within balance versus the ones that have been taken versus the new ones, I can't say.
Lord John wants us to supplementary.
Yeah, I've got one question which I would like to put to Ada, but I understand the limitations of distance, so I'll put it to you. Does she understand empathy? And then a comment. Well, it's interesting that Kazuo Ishiguro has been there well before you, hasn't he, when he wrote the book Clara and the Sun. And I know you've read it. I don't know who else has read it. It is an amazing book. And it focuses so much on this ability, not only for an individual, the robot, to have this sensitivity, but then the human who reacts with her. And that relationship, as I listen to you explain it, but I am interested in the empathy question.
Yeah, two responses. Ishiguro actually selected Ada to be part of her documentary with Alan Yentob. It's on BBC iPlayer, you're welcome to go and see it.
Well, I will do. I haven't seen
so
it.
In actual fact, The Clara and the Sun is very close to our hearts because actually the author selected Ada to explore that whole notion. You said, does Ada understand empathy? Well, I'm cutting in already before that with the word understand. She does not understand, full stop. Yeah. And so, so therefore the idea of her understanding empathy, we don't even get there because she doesn't understand.
I'd replace understand with possess.
I think the thing is, it's a bit like the Ishiguro concept. I think there's a lot of projection onto these technologies. If you saw the responses, we've taken Ada all over the world now, remarkably, and to see the responses that people give her, we've started to ask the camera people who come with us to video the people looking at Ada because of their responses are so great and in very, very different ways. Complete Marmite. They either love seeing her get really excited, or they think, oh my gosh, it's terrible, we must destroy her. And so the reaction is very, very great. So I think empathy from Ada to us, currently, I haven't seen any convincing technology. Our reaction to Ada, we're very reactionable.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. Lord Hall.
Hello, Ada.
Hello there.
What are the limits of technology in creating art?
Art can be many things, from a painting or drawing to a performance or poem. My art practice includes all of the above. When it comes to traditional art practices, some people say that technology cannot be used in traditional art practices, but others believe that it can be valuable. Because art is often up to interpretation, the role of the audience is key. In general, contemporary artists often seek to engage with their audience and create a dialogue about important issues or ideas. So long as technology remains an important topic of discussion in society, there are not many limits to how it can be used in a contemporary art setting.
I thought that was fascinating because actually it's back to the thing I wanted to ask you, and Ada, of course, which is about audiences and responding to it. I actually haven't found this a kind of depressing session at all. I find it actually rather exhilarating because I think it's not either or. It's all of the above. It's AI helping artists to create. much as Painters Workshop helped painters to do extraordinary things. I think AI will produce art. There's no doubt about that. And then us as audiences have got to work out the quality of it. But something you said earlier on, which I thought was really important, which was, you said, one, she doesn't understand. But also you said, artists is there to deal with the human condition. So my question or my thought is, can AI understand the human condition, given it's not human? It can understand data about the human condition, but in the end, there's still going to be a role for artists who are human to explore what great art does through music, through painting, through dance, or whatever, or theatre, the human condition.
Only that vast majority of data that AI uses is human. So therefore the outputs from that are going to feel human.
But it's the interpretation of that can only be human. I mean, AI can have its interpretation of something,
yes,
which may or may not resonate with an artist. But actually, in the end, is there or is there not? I mean, I would argue there would be something about a human artist which is going to be different to what AI might produce, but actually might feel more tangible, more, just more interesting to us.
I don't know. I think the imitation with the human is going to be so remarkable that it actually doesn't matter whether it's conceived human or not, because the imitation is so close. And I think that's a significant point. Alan Turing wrote a remarkable paper in 1951 about intelligent machines. And there was one line in there which Ada went to the Venice Biennale, there was one line in Turing's paper that said, actually imitating a human is like the unpleasant aroma of an artificial flower. Why would you want aroma from an artificial flower when you can have a real flower?
Yeah.
And I think that philosophically and ethically is a very interesting point. Is we've gone to great lengths. We've done this as a way of mirroring back to ourselves. But actually, in that mirroring back, we've realised we are having enormous energies on aspects that make us seem like human. Why are we not looking after humans? Do you see what I mean? Because actually, if we did sometimes as much industry in the artificial reality versus the real, and we particularly think that in the biotech world, we're seeing that there's some incredible, especially with synthetic biology, where they're able to use data in remarkable ways to change all sorts of aspects, and that blurring between technology and people is very real. And I just think, wow, there's so much industry to be able to imitate. And yet we've got actually each other. So it's quite an interesting...
I think that analogy is really interesting, that you can have something which is industrially produced, but actually I'd rather like to know where what I'm eating has come from, and the sourcing of it, and the kind of, and the natural state of it, as it were, as opposed to something which is produced in a different way. Fascinating. Thank you very much.
I do want to be clear that Ada is very confusing. On some level, it is a deception because you think she looks like a human. She isn't a human, she's a machine. We're fully aware of that as a project. We're not trying to pretend anything here. We are really trying to do it as a mirror and say, look, this is confusing because in the world it's confusing, and she's trying to mirror that confusion.
Really stimulating. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I guess my final question to you, Mr. Mellor, would be, you said at the start that one of the reasons for commencing this project and creating Ada was to provoke. This was an act of provocation. And I just wondered, do you feel that the reaction that you are getting to this provocation is in line with what you expected, or not really?
I think my last point, the one that I've come to try and summarise all of these different complex areas, is to try and say that creativity is not restricted to subjective, internal, conscious brain processes. Creativity can very much be done very well, thank you, by AI in lots of remarkable ways. And it can be studied and mimicked. And that is a game changer in the fact that it can study and mimic human processes super well. It is a tearing away of realizing that actually creativity is not subjective, internal, conscious brain processes. And suddenly realizing something that we've had so fundamental to our own identity, we're now going into a world where that is now clearly demonstrated as not being that. I think it's no longer just human. And AI machine learning is going to be very capable at language, at image creation, at music creation. We are going into a world where those processes are going to be mimicked extraordinarily well. And so to just try to navigate this new realization about where we are with creativity. We use Professor Margaret Bowden's definition for creativity, which is new, surprising, and of value. So the algorithms that run, many algorithms that Ada is uniquely being developed for her, are new, they're specific to Ada, they're surprising, we don't know what she's going to do. We are looking over the shoulder to see the artwork that she does. And of value, well, in light of even the first exhibition she ever did, which was at Oxford University, was in over 900 publications, just that first exhibition. So for a new artist, that was pretty breathtaking. So, and then when we went, of course, to show the work at the Pavilion in Venice, the response was just so great. So I think people are realizing that we are going into a world of non-human creativity. That is a reality that we're facing now. And it really is for us all to engage with that. But I think your point, Lord Foster, about it's actually all of those things. It's going to be enhancing artists and helping them. It's going to replace some artists as well.
Well, thank you again for being here and for bringing Ada. And as I said, I know this was a massive operation in terms of getting her here, and we're very grateful to you for that and for your time and for helping us grapple with the challenges and opportunities of technology in terms of creative industries. And our inquiry continues. And today, your session and the one that we've had earlier this afternoon have been a big contribution to that. We're very grateful to you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.